Okay, let's start.
Yes, just setting up a meeting for YouTube Live. Okay, yeah, we are live.
Hi, Mario.
Shall I start?
Yeah, yeah, please.
Okay,
Yes, sure.
okay. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to this exclusive masterclass, Telling Lives, Shaping Change by Mr. Yogesh Pawar, supported by UNFPA. I am Pooja Nagdev, Ladli Media Coordinator at Population First. This initiative is brought to you by Population First, a social impact organization dedicated to addressing gender inequality and advancing social development. One of our flagship program is Ladli, a gender sensitization campaign that collaborates with media, advertising, and academics to promote gender-sensitive content and challenge harmful stereotypes. Through Ladli, we aim to foster inclusive dialogue and action around gender and mental health, particularly in the fields of journalism and communication. Today's masterclass will focus on how case studies in effective journalism can inspire impactful storytelling, amplify unheard voices, and shape meaningful change. It is my privilege to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Yogesh Pawar, the Program Director at Population First. Mr. Pawar is a seasoned journalist with over 30 years of experience across print, web, and television. A postgraduate from TISS in medical and psychiatric social work. He also worked briefly as a marital and sexual counselor before beginning his remarkable journey in journalism. We are truly honored to have the opportunity to learn from him today. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping announcements. Kindly switch on your cameras if possible. We'd love to see you. Please keep your microphones muted during the session to avoid any interruptions. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in chat box. These will be taken during the Q&A session at the end. If you would like to ask question directly, please use the raise hand feature and unmute yourself when invited. With that, it is my pleasure to hand over to Mr. Pawar.
Thank you very much, Pooja. I think, um, everyone here, I mean, like, like they are excited. I'm also very excited about interacting with all of you to find out how you can use some of these skills that I have honed over the years, how you can use that to better your storytelling techniques, how you can use that to make your work more impactful and improve your outreach. So, to begin with, we wanted to just go through. I have created a PPT. Just this is the PPT is actually not so much as sort of a cast in stone thing. I have just created it as sort of a reference point so that one is able to understand where one is what one is trying to achieve with this kind of a masterclass. So, in terms of establishing its contours, I have this PPT to which now I will request Pooja to go on to that. And once we've established why case studies are important, so then we will get into how we will go about preparing for case studies. First of all, I mean, I want to start with us speaking a little about why everyone must get the hang of crafting cracking case studies. Today, we live in a world where it's not only something that journalists do, it is not only something that a journalist working with in print or web or television does, but it is also everybody who is equipped with a camera and a mic, that is with a mobile phone, is now is as good as a journalist. So then they go around um, documenting what they see around, and that helps bolster what they're trying to say. So even if it is simply something, as you will notice that people making reels recently, there were these floods, and when people were making reels, I believe somebody's microphone is yeah. If you can mute your microphone, then probably it will be yeah. Um, so basically, you must have noticed that during the floods, when people were out giving a sense to the outside world of what is happening, unfolding in their neighborhood. then very often the way they would go about doing that was to by telling the story through a case study. They would pick up an example of somebody and then use that to bring people abreast with what is happening in their neighborhood. So, in that respect, I would feel this is not only about any disaster, but it is also about even a success story, even if it is something beautiful that you want to convey, that a change that is happening because of a certain intervention. Then, for that, you to establish that that is happening, you will have the case study is the best possible way to go and do this, which is why it is important that everybody learns to craft good, impactful case studies. Can we come to the next slide? So, there will be people who will say that we use facts and figures. We our numbers talk, but tell the whole story. Why do we need this descriptive long narrative? Why do we have to continuously resort to telling individual stories when we have numbers that we can? But do numbers really tell the whole story? I've here in this um, slide you can see we have spoken about pie charts. Like if you look at bar graphs, pie charts, histograms, all these we may try to show that a certain kind of success has been achieved. So, on a glance, maybe it will give you a sense of what is happening. But will this tell you within that each of those slivers what is happening? What is happening within that? So, because all of us, let's remember, are individual, and as individual human beings, we are unique in the sense that we all bring something to the table which is unique. And in that sense, how whatever is happening around impacts us will make us respond differently, which is why our experiences will be unique, and documenting those and helping those using those to tell our story is very important, which is why I've said that pie charts alone won't change the world. Can you come to the next slide, Pooja? So why, like I said, you will have graphs, data, and impact statements saying that we have been able to change, we have been able to bring इतने लोगों को गरीबी रेखा से हमने उठाया है. Or we will be able to say things like so many people have been uh, registered for with for Aadhaar or something like that. If we want to, if anybody wants to make that kind of a statement, then they use these statements. But if you actually go down to see what the kind of struggle that each individual goes through, for example, if somebody is uh, a trans woman and lives on the margins of society and they don't have a specific address, then if you just go and say that so many percentage of people are still without Aadhaar card, then the experience of this trans woman is going to be very different from, say, the struggles of other people. So, how will that be established? So, which is why I feel that, a case study makes it so much more interesting. Annual reports are, brimming with jargon and color. But then in these annual reports, also very often, we sort of gloss over the surface. We talk about larger points and we keep on moving at a galloping speed. And in that respect, what happens is individual stories somehow get lost. So, what does it actually mean on the ground? I've asked there as a third point. So, those things will only come across if you are able to go into the minutiae of what is happening in each case. Unless that is done, then it will never make the kind of impact that we are seeking to achieve. Am I at all at any point in saying that pie charts and facts and figures are not important? No, I am not saying that. But I am saying like when you go when you serve yourself a thali, it is not only the rice and the roti that is going to work, right? You will have to have something else which will stand out in the plate, which will give you a sense of what is happening, the burst of flavors. So all that is where the case study comes in. So let's come to the next one. Now, what happens with case studies is that you have Each story will be told with great insight and individual insight. It will be told, we will use a certain kind of turn of phrase, a kind of storytelling style, in which by itself, from the first sentence itself, you are drawn into that person's XYZ axis. You are able to understand what is her or his ecosystem like. And that is where that is what we are trying to do with the reader. We are trying to hold their hand and take them into that world when we tell the story. So a good case study puts a face to the fact. So apart from your facts and figures, which I said are there in the story, but when we give an individual's name and we say that, and we give their pictures, we talk about them, this makes that situation come alive to the reader or the viewer, and whoever is looking at that will understand that this is what is happening at the human level, at an individual level. And that has a very different impact from simply reading about numbers. So, which is why the case study becomes important. For example, there is this woman whose picture I have used in this slide. She's Johnson Angmo from Kinnaur. Now, this woman is vision impaired. She climbed up the Mount Everest and successfully planted the tricolor on Mount Everest. Now, the moment we say, if we say that there's a larger report on Mount Everest people summitteering, then what we can say see is that, we can say that in 24-25 so many people went up to Mount Everest and were able to scale the peak. We can also say that we can give a breakup saying that so many were men, so many were women. You can also say so many were Indians, so many are non-Indians. Maybe you can also go down into a breakup of state-wise breakup. But can we go beyond that and then look at what is so special about her is the fact that she's vision impaired and she achieved this. She's the first vision impaired woman to have done this. Now, this itself makes it so exceptional. So you will notice, and so when we talk about these stories, we give specific names and places so that people don't only get a number, but they also get a sense of where this person is. Like I said, the location is very important because the moment I say she is from Kinnaur, the moment I say she's from Kinnaur, it we all know Kinnaur is known for its apple, but we also know that it's a Uttarakhand. We are now talking of the foothills of the Himalayas. She comes from that kind of a hilly terrain, and then she's vision impaired. So she's had a difficult life, and from there she's been able to. How did that impact her, and how did that make her? So those stories become more important once we give the location. Or, for example, you will say, if you say something like, 10,000 adolescent girls have been reached, or when you say deprivation and hunger, you use these phrases so that you are drawing the reader or the viewer into your story and your case study. Come to the next one, please. These case studies, why do we have them? Because we are also, it is the media is always, whatever we do with any media, I'm not talking about journalists alone, but anybody who does anything to document something and create media content is also doing it because it means that there is some agenda setting involved, because we want somebody to intervene, or we want to talk about an intervention and how it can be further bolstered if people come forward to provide more funds. Then this means that we are actually pushing forward with a certain kind of an advocacy. And sometimes this means winning hearts, and sometimes it also means winning heads also. So you are working towards that, and very cleverly, that is what your agenda is, even when you set out to make this. So while policy briefs inform, they will tell you what is happening. It's a very dry way of, you read a policy paper and it's a very dry thing. But the moment you talk of case studies, people are moved by it. As human beings, the emotional connect is immediately there. So the case studies move people. The right story can nudge policy and shift mindset. So basically, if you have somebody who is reading the story, say a minister, a bureaucrat, or somebody sitting in an NGO, which is a partner NGO, or somebody who is reading your story because you're reporting on it, then I think it also creates a sort of a it triggers a sort of a change in their mindset and makes them rethink what they're doing, how it can be either corrected or made better. So in both ways, it has its impact. One of the bonus benefits that is there along with both these benefits is the fact that it gets attention before the coffee and snacks disappear. So basically, it is not something that people sit through and it's boring. And so from the word go, the moment I spoke about Chonzin, I said the moment I said she's vision impaired and she's conquered Mount Everest, the moment I say that, people are going to sit up and take cognizance of what is being said. And that I think is very important, because from the word go, from the first word itself, we have to have a hook and get people involved in what is being said. Yeah. Can we come to the next one, please? Now, it can be, for example, it can lead to fundraising, or it can be important from a fundraising point of view. Case studies can be, because donors love outcomes. They can feel what is going on in the field because of that. It and for people who are documenting this, whether it is journalists, whether it is media persons, whether it is filmmakers, a real life narrative, it will be any day better than any kind of spreadsheet that you put out there. Like I said in the beginning, I made it very clear that it is not like I'm discounting the spreadsheet, but this will definitely make it more important. When somebody is trying to sell you a mutual fund, or somebody is trying to sell you the idea of investing in stocks, they don't simply say, if they simply tell you, yeah, you put in so much and in 5 years it will become so much, and 20, 10 years it will become, they actually use an example of somebody who has done this. Then they say that, look, he has been able to go from here to here. And you look at his journey, and then you sort of start gauging it for yourself and say, okay, maybe this is what I need to do. So, which is why a real life narrative is very important. It also builds trust. So, people realize that means this is a true story. It is about a real person. This is someone who is in flesh and blood and has been through this. So that is very important. It also becomes a very important way of making things real for people. Can we come to the next slide? So it also is something that happens from inside. It's very organic. Case studies will help you reflect. When somebody tells you, if I am a journalist and somebody tells me that, you know we have gone and registered so many voters, okay, and that is why we know that we've been able to weed out fraud voters or whatever. If we simply go by that statement saying number percentage wise and large this thing, then it could be a blanket statement. But when I go into the field, into that very neighborhood that they speak about, that block, and I go village to village, that's how now we found these stories that are coming out, right? People have been misrepresented, or they found themselves going missing from the electoral roll. So those kind of things have only come out because people went chasing individual case studies and didn't go by simply numbers. They went name by name, gully by gully. They went to each house, they went to each house address, and they tried to find out what is happening. And that's where we came out. We found some of the most interesting case studies, which are making headlines these days. So we also, because of that, it tells us what is working on the ground and what is not working. And then it also tells us of what needs to be done to improve the situation. So for journalists, we can simply say that, instead of simply giving the scope and magnitude of a problem, we also like to end our report by suggesting what could be the alternatives which could solve the problem. So it is not a problem approach, but a solution approach, which is why we will be able to suggest alternatives only when we go into case studies like this. It also fuels learning and smarter programming. So, for people who are in the voluntary sector, this is, of course, great organizational learning, because you may be thinking something works as a blanket approach, but you will notice that maybe we have to tweak it when it comes to individual levels, because realities will be very different and everybody's XYZ axis is very, very different. Their ecosystems are different. they are doing different things to them. So one will have to look at those aspects also. Come to the next one. It is also very important that when you go and write about stories, if you simply talk about, say, something that is happening, for example, at the 26th January Republic Day parade, if a community is going to be represented in a tableau from a state, if somebody from one community, there are so many members who are going. If I go and highlight their case study and point out how they are preparing to go to the 26th January, the Republic Day parade tableau, how they are going about preparing for it, it means that the community feels when it gets written about, when it gets spoken about, instead of simply saying there is one tableau from Maharashtra which is going. Instead of saying that, we go actually there, we go into the in-depth case studies of each of that community, and we of each of those people who are actually participating in that display. When we go there, the community feels proud. They feel हमको भी कोई देख रहा है, हमारी भी कोई सुनवाई हो रही है. So they also feel cherished and valued. And that is very important because everybody in this world is looking for wanting they people as human beings, we all like to be valued. And if communities and individuals know that that is happening, it is a good thing, and it makes them it draws them closer to you. And chances are, as media persons, when you do this, they will in the future become your sources for other stories. They can become an information highway for you to tap into as and when you want. Yeah, you have to tell their stories. When you tell their stories, this also builds trust and participation. Like I said, people will feel that हमारी भी सुनवाई हो रही है. When they see that kind of a thing happening, then they start trusting you, which means they open up. You have gone there to write out Republic Day, but slowly somebody tells you about the primary healthcare center which never opens, or of a school teacher who's being rude with the children, or some hand pump which is not working in the village, or something like that. They will feel like opening up and talking to you. And just like that, you start getting more and more case studies for different kinds of stories to be told. And that is very important as storytellers, as people who want to document what is going around. I think it is very important to build this kind of a source base. And this is very important. Beneficiaries then become partners. Like I said, then they not only remain people who you've gone and documented, but they also become partners because next time they have your phone number, they will call you. हमारे गांव में बहुत लोगों को एक बीमारी हो गई है, पता नहीं क्या क्या हो रहा है. So then they talk about a certain kind of disease, and you immediately are able to either document it, alert the authorities there, or do something that you can from a voluntary from the voluntary sector. So in that sense, they also become storytellers because they are now carrying stories to you. They are telling stories. So you see how this becomes like a movement. हमारे यहाँ in हिंदी में they say जोत से जोत जला. You take one lamp and you light others. It is something like that. Come to the next one, please. And like I said, one story, it is not necessary that it becomes like just a story by itself. There will be many uses to this kind of a story. What are the stories uses? It can become a media feature. It can become a social media campaign. Like you must have seen, like I started when I this presentation, I mentioned the flooding that Mumbai experienced recently in the rain. And you will notice that so many people put out messages, and finally it forced authorities to put out messages saying what are the helpline numbers, who are the people they can contact, what are the authorities who are what kind of interventions are going on, and who people can contact if they find themselves marooned or trapped or something like that. So they were also forced to. So this is a good way of trying to create intervention. Sort of you provoke intervention by putting stuff out there. Yeah. And it also becomes very important because then you create for your training manuals, for your quarterly reports, for your annual reports. You are able to create a kind of a documentation of what is happening on the ground. And like I said, it goes beyond just numbers and graphs and charts. It goes beyond that into actual stories about actual people. Sometimes, like you saw, a reel which I forget whether it was Andheri or somewhere, where a person pulled out a boat and he went around paddling in a boat, a paddle boat which he had taken out in the flood waters. Just by showing that and the fact that there is so much waterlogging for so long and how long people have been stuck, just by doing that reel went viral. So it can also become a sort of a sensation, and through that sensation, it can garner attention. It can make authorities sit up and take notice, and intervention can come your way. So that is one of the success stories that we see of the storytelling. Can you come to the next one? So basically, what do case studies do? Case studies, one, they bridge the gap between data and drama. So whatever data you have and what is happening, playing out in the real world there, so it works as a sort of a bridge. They persuade, inspire, and sometimes bring your work to life. So they are also things which will, like I said, you are eating something and you get this slightest hint of a small piece of chili in that bite, and you realize how your taste buds activate. So it is that kind of a function that case studies do, that they suddenly awaken your senses and you realize that, hey, your empathy sort of kicks in. You realize, oh my God, this is what is happening here. Yeah. And if you've taken the trouble of going somewhere to gather data, if you've taken the trouble of going there and braved circumstances to be in a situation which may not be the most friendly situation sometimes, but if you've gone into that kind of situation, then it's worth that you come back with a few case studies as well instead of simply data, because that will finally help you tell the story properly of what is happening, and it will be able to impact people much more strongly. Yeah, come to the next one. The next one. Yeah. So if you're in the business of change, learn to tell stories that stick. So we are all aspiring to bring about change in our circumstances, in the circumstances that we see around. We all want something better to happen. And for that to happen, we need to tell stories that stick. I had a colleague who was reporting on potholes. They are the seasonal thing that every reporter does stories on. Our roads get into a very, very bad shape every monsoon. There was a pothole where the Jogeshwari Vikrori Link Road meets the Western Express Highway. There was a very, very big pothole. And guess what this reporter had done? He is himself quite huge. What he did was he went and lay down in that pothole. He actually lay down in the pothole. And he said, ये इतना बड़ा गड्ढा है कि मैं खुद इसमें समा सकता हूँ. He actually said this in his piece to camera. And then that's to image. Now the road has been repaired and did get repaired and all that. But after so many years, every time, whenever people talk about that place and the problems that the roads have, every time it is that piece to camera that people bring up. Though it's so many years, it's almost maybe 2005 or 6 that he had done this story. But it is in spite of that people still bring it up. So it means that it is stuck. It is there, and it is in people's minds all the time. So its recall value is very strong. And for that, I think an important case study should do that and a lot more, because it should have very, very strong recall value. Having said that, now, I have uh, told you why case studies need to be done. Let's also look at what are some of the prerequisites of a good case study. And for, we will come to, so we need to remember what are the do's and don'ts when it comes to case studies. I'm going to um, talk about this. And as we, like, when I finish speaking about this, I will open it up to questions also. So when we do questions, you can obviously ask me in individual instances that you have anything that you want to specifically be highlighted. Then you can ask me questions about. But let's see what is actually um, needed for a good case study. One, first and foremost, you have to start with a clear purpose. You have to define why you are documenting this case. You have to ask yourself, what change do I want to highlight? Whom do I want to influence? So your target is something that you need to be very, very clear about, and you have to understand who you want to influence. Then, when you have that target audience in mind, then that purpose should guide the tone, the depth, and the framing. What you will say in a news report for television will be very different from what it will be for a newspaper. What you will say, for example, on a Instagram reel will be very different from what you will say on a Facebook post as a video post. So, depending on who your target audience is, it will be very, very different. Suppose you wanted to send something like this to a government department, then probably your depth and the framing will be completely different. So, which is why you have to be very clear about what is your purpose. Yeah. And then this after this, the second point that one is has to remember is choosing the right case study. When you go around speaking to people and figuring out case studies, you have to pick stories that are representative. When we cook rice at home, I know many of us use a pressure cooker, but suppose you still do the old-fashioned way of cooking rice in a dish. Um, and what would you do? You would just pick up to if the rice is done. In order to check that, you would pick up one grain of rice and check whether it is done, and that tells you. So what are you? What is that one grain of rice? It is a representative grain of rice. It is relatable, and it is aligned with your objective to see that rice is cooked. So similarly, when you pick up a case study, you have to remember that it has to be representative, it has to be relatable, and it has to align with your objective. A perfect success story isn't always the most powerful. Sometimes it may not be necessary that it is some big tam jam story of some person who has, like, I brought in the example of Chonzin from Kinnaur. Now, Chonzin Angmo is vision impaired and she's climbed the Mount Everest and it is great. But just suppose that I did a story about other vision impaired women who are preparing for mountaineering or for some other task which would seem difficult on the face of it, how they are preparing. So sometimes even if you pick up a story where there is partial success, even that will resonate a lot more than complete success in something which is high flying. The moment you say something like that, like the moment I say she's vision impaired and she's saying, ha, once in a while somebody is lucky. If this is, unsurmountable, nobody is going to be able to do this. Even you and me can't do it. People have that, this naysaying business is very strong. So you will have to find sometimes say case studies which are not like miracle, but they are almost miracles sometimes, but they're not complete miracles. And those also they resonate very, very importantly with people. Yeah. And the third point that I want to think, you should remember that it has to be you have to put people at the center. You have to remember for if I was doing a story around, say, a woman who was leading a movement against alcohol in the liquor vends in her village, then I have to be able to look at her as a human being, not simply that movement. So giving her context, her ecosystem, her XYZ axis. She's a mother. She's someone who is in Anganwadi teacher. She's a mother. She's this. She's now taken up these cudgels because her husband is an alcoholic, and so what is she going about doing to raise awareness in the village and get like-minded women like her join the movement? So you have to remember to put people at the center. And only then, if you see the fact that if you go and say there is a movement against alcohol, that by itself cannot work. So you will have to go and to make the case study important, establishing her as a human being is very important. And the next point is you have to capture their voices, her experiences, and emotions of the people involved, and not just statistics. You can't say, "Oh, there are 15 women who she has gathered in a group, and they are marching against this every day, and ensuring that the alcohol is not sold there." No, you have to capture each person's voice and bring out the humanness. Sometimes they will face, you know women who do this sometimes face violence in their own houses or violence from other men in the village. So you have to be able to highlight that as well. And what have they done to counter that kind of violence? So that also. And remember that when you do case studies, their direct quotes are very important. Let me tell you of something very funny. Of recently, I came across a story on drought. Yeah, somebody had reported on drought in Rajasthan, where they said that there is so much difficulty of about getting water. The story starts with telling you that women have to walk miles to get water, which is which is great to establish the story to begin it. But then when I went on reading the story, the voices that were being um, quoted over there, all the voices were men's voices. So the Sarpanch was a man who was speaking about how it is difficult and how our women are suffering and this and that. And so then it became the block development officer. Then he spoke and he was also giving his own gyan on what was happening. So everybody that was spoken to, so much so that later on some of the villagers that were spoken to were also the men. But tell me, any one of you who is listening to this masterclass will know that when in a village, drought affected village, there is no water, whose suffering increases manifold. It is the women's suffering that increases manifold. Where are their voices in that kind of a story? So, which is why take their consent, tell them that I want to quote you and I want to talk to you. Tell them, make them comfortable, and get them to open up and tell you their stories in their voice with their suffering being highlighted. Yeah. So that is the one technique to bring authenticity to your story. Without that, there cannot be authenticity. Then the next point is setting context. Without a context, today, for example, why we are doing this masterclass in the beginning, she set the context, right? Pooja introduced the idea of the masterclass, then she introduced me, and she set the context for this masterclass. Similarly, you have to remember to set the context for your case study. Briefly describe the background, social, cultural, economic, sometimes political also. You have to be able to uh, describe the background to set the context. You have to also explain why this case is significant within that setting. Without that, then, people will not understand. So many women are suffering. Suppose I brought that drought story up again. I think so many women are affected. Why did we pick up this particular woman? So you will notice that already, suppose I pick up a woman, she is someone who is a Dalit who lives in the external limits of the village where lower caste live. And say, for example, that she has so many difficulties she faces as a Dalit and a woman. And there is another level of difficulty added to her life by the fact that her access to water is so poor. So when there is drought also, when access to water becomes available in some source, then you will notice that the upper castes will have better access to the water and people who are already powerful, whereas the marginalized will find it more difficult, so much more difficult. They have so many more barriers to cross to have access to that water. The fact that we are able to highlight this and make this clear to the reader or the viewer makes this case significant and then tells them why we are using this particular case in that setting. Yeah. Then you have to remember to structure the case study very, very well. Without that, without that good flow, even if the best possible case study, will completely collapse. It will not work. So, in order for it to work, you have to structure it well. It has to have, to begin with, it has to have an introduction. Who is this person? What is this community? What is their issue? Why are we doing this? That introduction should definitely be there. Then the second point in this, in the structure that we have to talk about is challenge. What are the difficulties that they do these people, this community, this individual, what are the difficulties they face? The third should be intervention. What was done? What was the intervention? What was done? And who made the intervention? By whom? Yeah. The fourth one will be outcome and impact. Because of that intervention, what changed? What was the outcome? Yeah. What did happen because of that? So that you need to highlight. There should be some reflection also in the end where you say, what can others learn from this? So if there is a story, like to come back to the drought story, if we say that something has been done in order to create an intervention where this drought is addressed or women's lives are made, if not free from this misery, at least less miserable, then what can other villages which are suffering similarly, drought hit villages, what can they take away from this story? That should definitely be there, because otherwise, why are we telling this story? This story should work like a template for others to emulate. So that is one of the reflections that needs to be there when we are going around doing case studies. This is our structure bit. The sixth point that I wanted to make was balance. We have to create a balance in our case study, and the balance has to be both qualitative and quantitative. Yeah. Now, I've in the beginnings tried to tell you that it should not be numbers, it should not be numbers, but let me tell you, you can use numbers to increase the credibility of your story. Yeah. For example, Population First runs this in its communities, working in the tribal blocks of Shahpur. It works in villages to, it has bridge education intervention, which means that children who are dropping out of school are encouraged through this bridge education to come back to school and become part of the mainstream schooling once again. Now, when we are doing this kind of a case study, we give these case studies and then we say that attendance has increased by so and so percent, say by 60% or something. What the moment we bring that in with these case studies, it improves the credibility of your work, it improves and it makes the numbers alive. People are able to see, oh, so this is what the point that they were trying to make. They're able to join the dots and the numbers come alive. You have to blend your data and your narrative so that it creates, the numbers will give trust and the narrative will create empathy. So data and narrative for trust and empathy. So this kind of a balance is very, very important. Without that, otherwise the story will either be too drab or otherwise it will only be lots of atmosphere. You will have just violence in the background. People can maybe weep, this, that when they read your story. And then once they've read it, they've forgotten. So that is not what you're trying to achieve, right? Just because pickle adds flavor to your thali doesn't mean we will eat one full thali of pickles. Will we? No, we will not. So that means that it has to have something substantial also going on in that thali. Similarly, the case study also has to have an element of both data and narrative so that we have trust and empathy. Now we come to a point which is very important, that uh, this is like a, well, how shall I say? It's almost cast in stone. It is important cardinal principle. You cannot disregard this principle. You have to always remember to be ethical and respectful. When just because you are out there to do a case study, it doesn't mean that you are doing them any favors. That is not the kind of chip on the shoulder that people really appreciate, and it undermines all your work, and people will kind of look down on you. Let me tell you of a story where somebody from CNN, internationally known network, I'm not talking of CNN IBN, I'm talking of CNN, went down to the Congo where in Congo there are now two there's a civil war going on for many years, and she went down to the Congo and she was reporting on this civil war, where lots of women are taken captive and then they are brutally there is a lot of sexual violence unleashed on them, and this is done from one group or the other. So this woman actually went into a camp where refugees were being kept, and she went into a tent where women were, and she says, has anyone here been raped and speaks English? She asked. That's a very famous thing. You can actually go and look it up on the internet, and this is not something that I'm speaking anecdotally. I am telling you that this is what the journalist did. Just imagine the levels of insensitivity that can be that you've parachuted there for collecting a case study, and maybe your realities only allow you that kind of interface. But does it behove anyone to go into a place and say, has anyone been raped here and speaks English? So you realize how that approach can be so problematic, which is why it is very important to be ethical and respectful. You have to take informed consent before sharing names, images, or details. If you are speaking to someone, you tell them, you ask them, हम आपका फोटो ले रहे हैं, क्या आपका नाम इसमें जा सकता है? You have to be able to understand that this is very, very important. Even if it is something, I'm not saying it is a case of sexual violence where you need to be careful. Even if it's a simple story about ration cards and access to food grains at a PDS shop, even in that kind of a story, it is great. For example, a trainee reporter in NDTV where I was had gone and done a story on PDS. And she said that the local man had the local man who ran the PDS shop would siphon off all the food grains that came to the PDS shop and they would be forced to buy at higher rates from the open shop. So this is something that she had said. Now, this reporter went and recorded it and kept brought it, and he never spoke to that woman saying that, when she was speaking, the camera zoomed in on the whole group was speaking. The woman also spoke. The camera zoomed in at the editing table that was cut out as a bite and it was used in the story. Now, the PDS shop is run by the nephew of the local MLA who's a known goon. Do you realize that that woman and her family were put through, they were put through the fires of hell itself just because this man had irresponsibly used her soundbite. If he had asked her, she would have said, "Nahi, hamara chehra mat dikhai." He could have morphed her face, or he could have done something else to mask her identity. But the fact that he did this, it means that he put her life and her family's life also in danger. So this is something that can be avoided. It your case study should is no case study that you want to put out is more important than an individual's life, is it? So that is something that we need to remember. You have to avoid voyeurism and reinforcing stereotypes. You can't, for example, say so and so show somebody who is, like what Bollywood does. You can't show that just because they're a Catholic family you're showing, then you show them all sitting and drinking alcohol, or when you want to show somebody who's a from a certain state, then you show them in colorful clothes or you show their food and you sort of use a mocking tone to reinforce stereotype. This is something that is avoidable, and don't take that outsider's view of, oh, look at these people, look at what they eat, oh my god, look at the kind of clothes they wear. That kind of approach is radically wrong. It is problematic on many, many levels. And I feel that this is something that comes in with a lot of parachute journalists and people who go with that outsider's approach. Yeah. We are not there seeking like drugs, when people go seeking a high. We are not going there seeking a helper's high. What we are going there is to help create some kind of an intervention by documenting a case study. And this is something that should always be there, and clarity on that should be there in your head. Ensuring dignity in portrayal, especially of marginalized communities. When you show marginalized communities, please remember that you have to You cannot sort of exoticize them. You cannot put them on a pedestal and make them a sort of a showcase, put them under a microscope and say, look at these people, देखिए इन लोगों को कैसे रहते हैं. That kind of an approach is really, really wrong. It cannot work like that. Having said that, I will tell you of a story. Um, there was a there is a small village in between Jawahar and Mokhada called Penkachi Wadi, and we had gone to this hillock where these homes are often isolated homes on hillocks. So you have to walk through the forest and you trudge up a hillock, and on top there will be one family staying. And as we were just beginning the first steps of going up the hillock, a little boy came running and he said, "Don't come now. You'll have to wait." And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "My father's gone to the next forest to collect firewood, and my mother's just had bath." So he told me, I said, he explained to me that she doesn't have another sari to wear. So she bathed and she first thing she went in is and washed the sari and gave it to him. And he, the sweet little boy, some 8, 10-year-old boy, he had tied the sari on one end to a shrub in front of their hut, and he was holding the other end, and he was running around in that open space, making the wind dry that sari. So by the time she finished bathing, he will be able to give her the dried saris, which she can drape and come out. So he was trying to stop us. Now, I had gone there to report on malnutrition. Suddenly, if I get up and start exoticizing this and use a sort of a voyeuristic this thing about how if I want, I can go, and the next time I went to that village, I told my colleagues in NDTV will uh, stand me out for this, that we placed a box in the newsroom and we said, everybody who has saris and clothes and stuff like that to give, please put in this box. And then the next time we went to that place, we went and gave those boxes to in those villages. I'm saying this is a better way to intervene and address that problem instead of highlighting that in my case study. By saying that you're basically taking voyeuristic delight, and it really is not your place to do that. Yeah. Also, coming to the next point, the eighth point, keep it simple and keep it real. Yeah. You have to remember that it has to be written in a very clear, accessible language. You don't need to unnecessarily use very big words and turns of phrase, which will sort of, apart from giving the sense that you are familiar and comfortable with big words, it does not help your purpose. Your Somebody has said, when I was a journalism student, somebody said that, to write Jahangir Patel, who used to teach me, if I'm young, he had told us in class, writing simply is much more difficult than writing in a tough, complicated way. So that is something that we should remember all the time, that we need to use clear, accessible language rather than jargon. And why? Because we don't know, we are trying to write for people to access it, cutting across denominators. Everybody should be able to access and understand what is being said. You have to avoid over glorification or making it sound like advertising. So please remember that beating the drum on something is wrong. It will work at cross purposes. People get put off. Just say it to the barest minimum. Sometimes, like in television, when we would do, sometimes you don't even need to use any words. We went to a village where there were farmers' suicides, and we went to a village where the son, the father, and the father-in-law, like her husband, the father-in-law, and her son, had all committed suicide. It had all happened in a span of 8 months. So the visual, I did not need to say anything in the voiceover. The widow sat there with her young child, was sitting on her lap, and behind her were these pictures with these garlands, three pictures. And it was just like a stark visual. We let the visual remain on the screen for a while, without saying anything, and then gave the timeline of when these deaths had happened. So I'm just saying that sometimes you don't need to say so, use so many words. By itself, it can be very powerful just to put that image out there or what you want to say in the minimal possible way. Um, you have to remember to be as authentic as possible, keep it grounded. People like I mentioned Jahangir Patel, who taught me, poor man, he's in hospital and battling for his life, and I'm bringing him up. Please remember to keep your story grounded. He would say that when you write, your writing, when you talk about those individuals, people who are reading should be able to smell the air that they are smelling, smell their foods, understand their reality. So that should come across. So authentic and grounded, and that should be more important. Your how authentic and grounded you are is more important than aiming for just impactful and hyperbole. Instead of just making talking in exaggerations, it is best to keep it as authentic as possible. Sometimes you have gone there prepared for a really worst case scenario, but by the time you go there, things have changed. So report it like it is, but that doesn't mean you go and you know um, play around and use exaggerations. Always try to link, when you want to link something that is happening. When I talk about malnutrition in Jawad Mukhada, I should be able to link it to the larger malnutrition and hunger problem in India. And India, what happens to accessibility to food? And the very fact that I'm able to funnel out the story and make it larger and take it to the larger national mainstream or sometimes the global mainstream. If I'm able to locate that story there, then people understand the severity. Jawar and Mokkada are only 2 hours outside, 2.5 hours at the max, outside India's financial capital, Mumbai. And yet, here there is malnutrition. The fact that we need to highlight this is to, um, the fact that we need to highlight this is important because it will, give the larger picture of what is going on. We have to be able to link the individual story to systemic issues. If there are larger systemic problems, then this individual story, where how it is affected by this systemic issue, is something that we need to highlight. You have to also highlight one person's journey, how it reflects the broader challenges and the possible solutions that you can maybe suggest. So that is very, very important that you do. The larger picture is important. The last point that I want to make is the 10th point, and it means that it has to end with a takeaway. You cannot simply put everything out there and say, well, this is wrong and this is happening. No. What lesson, what insight, what call to action should the reader carry? When they read, what should they feel? Should they go there in the weekends and distribute food? Should they start writing to the government? Should they start creating social media campaigns around this issue to ensure that this doesn't happen? In every case, it will be a different scenario that will play out. Yeah. And a good case study should inspire others to replicate, adapt, or scale the change. So you have to be able to, like I said, lighting one lamp, lighting other lamps with one lamp so that you illuminate an entire room. So that is very important. You can't just light one candle and say, hey, listen, I've got light. I'm the one who delivered light to this room. That is not going to really serve the purpose. You have to be able to spread the light also. So that is the final takeaway that you need to have with case studies. I think I've covered. I'm just quickly going to run through the headings of all the points that I made. I said start with a clear purpose. Then you have to choose the right case, the perfect case study, why you're choosing that you have to be clear about. You have to put people at the center, not all the other surround sound and optics. You have to put people at the center. Then you have to set the context. Without the context, everything is just lost. There's nothing in it that will be of any use. Yeah. You have to structure it well when you're writing. or when you're presenting, when you're video editing, you have to structure it well. So then I gave points about how the structure, introduction, challenge, intervention, and outcome or impact, reflection. So those were the points that were there in structure. After that, the next point I made, sixth point, was balance, that we need to have qualitative and quantitative balance in the story. Yeah. Both these things need to work so that you have data and narrative work in balance, in tandem, to create trust and empathy. The seventh point I made was about being ethical and respectful, which, like I said, it cannot be underlined enough about how important something like this is. The eighth point was about keeping it simple, keeping it real, so that people are able to access what you're saying. Yeah. You are not only writing for somebody who is sitting in New York, you're writing for so that somebody who is traveling in a crowded local train, folding the newspaper some 7, 8 times, they also are able to read it and be able to relate to it. So that is what you need to aim for. Yeah. Then, as I mentioned Jahangir Patel earlier, I must tell you what else he would tell me. To tell me, think of the woman who is chopping vegetables, helping her son with trigonometry homework, and watching the news when she's looking at you. So, are you targeting her? If she's being able to get what you're saying, then you're doing a good job. Otherwise, you're not. So, that is very important. Then, the next point I made was about show the larger picture. Yeah. Linking it to systemic issues is very important, the case study that we're doing. Finally, you have to end with a takeaway, where what is the lesson or the insight, or what are the takeaways for people to replicate this success story, or what can they avoid to ensure that this failure doesn't happen in their regions, their neighborhoods. So this is something that the story case study should definitely establish. So that brings us to kind of the I think I've kept it, instead of getting into too many theories about case studies and all that, there are lots of theories and all that. I don't think this should be a theoretical class. So I've kind of kept it as practical as possible so that you are able to use it as is being told. So I'll kind of wind it up there. What we can do is we'll open it up to question. Can we have questions from people? If you want to, you can raise your hand and start your camera and ask questions.
Yeah.
Pooja, you want to repeat the guidelines for questions?
Yeah. Uh, in case if there are any question, in case you want to ask any question, you can directly unmute yourself and ask, or use the raise hand button and unmute yourself, or directly just unmute and start your video and ask. Before they ask any question, I have one question. I wanted to ask, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, how important is it for journalists to follow up after publishing the case study, and how should they do it responsibly? Like,
It is very important for follow-up because, see, when you do a case study, the fact that you want them to also, like I said, when I was making my presentation, I said, you also want to make them into storytellers, right?
right?
You are a storyteller, but you want to make them also into storytellers.
Yeah.
So when you go and report, for example, if I'm going and reporting on um, in an uh, industrial workers colony, if there is a lot of domestic violence, if I go and report on that, then I should be able to call them and ask them, आपने देखा आज के पेपर में तो आपके बारे में छप के आया है, आप लोगों ने किस तरह से डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस अपने एरिया में रोका, उसके बारे में छप के आया है. So when I say that, then they also go, one of them goes and buys the paper, they look at it, they feel empowered, and they feel that they're doing a good thing and it is being encouraged
Hmm.
by the world at large, and it
Yeah.
makes them feel good. So I feel that it is very important that you go and do follow-ups to see that um, maybe over a period of time, see, it is not necessary that you follow the same steps or the same template continuously. If a movement has been started against domestic violence by the women's collective over there, then we have to find out, has something changed? Have have the men sort of are they pushing back in a certain way? Then are the women prepared with some other plan to counter that? So these are the kind of examples that will emerge from following up with that.
Yeah.
So very important that we do follow up.
Yes.
Yes,
Meenakshi ma'am, you have any questions? Or Govind sir?
Yes.
Can I speak?
Yes,
yes,
Govind
yes.
sir. Please go ahead.
योगेश जी, सुन पा रहे
Yes.
हैं आप? आवाज आई है?
हाँ बिल्कुल बिल्कुल गोविंद जी बोलिए आप।
मैं इतना कहना चाहता हूं, मेरे पास क्वेश्चन कोई नहीं है। और मैंने पूजा जी से कहा कि मैं अगले 15 मिनट में क्लास से हटूंगा। नंबर 2, मैं कहना इतना सा ही चाहता हूं कि आपने जितनी भी एक्सरसाइज की है ये बहुत बढ़िया की है। आगे आने वाले टाइम पे, ये अभी इस बार जितने लोग हैं, आगे आप और जो पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं उनको अगर इसको कॉपी करके भी शुरू में ही भेज देंगे इस सबको, तो उन लोगों को काम करने में बहुत मदद होगी। साल के शुरुआत में इस अवार्ड फंक्शन के बाद भेज दें आप, क्योंकि दो ही पर्पज होने चाहिए। मैं 1 मिनट का टाइम लूंगा आपका अपने
बिल्कुल
एक्सपीरियंस के बेसिस पर, कि दो ही पर्पज होने चाहिए कि या तो हमारी स्टोरी हार्ट विनिंग हो, दिल को जीतने वाली हो, और या फिर हार्ड हिटिंग हो, जो गवर्नमेंट को फोर्स करे उस सब्जेक्ट पर काम करने के लिए। हम लोगों ने अपने कैरियर में एक जर्नलिस्ट के तौर पे इसी लाइन पे काम किया। और एक छोटा सा एग्जाम्पल देते हुए, आज के 25, 15, 40 साल पहले राजस्थान का ही किस्सा बताता हूँ। आपने एक मेंशन किया, वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट था। वॉइस वो होनी चाहिए जिसके लिए हम कर रहे हैं। अगर उसी की उसमें कोट नहीं है या आवाज नहीं है तो कोई मायने नहीं है उसके। लेकिन हम लोग गए, फैमिली प्लानिंग का एक टूर था। उस दौर में ये होते थे कि गवर्नमेंट ऑफ सारी सरकारें लेके जाती थी जर्नलिस्टों को, तो राजस्थान की गवर्नमेंट भी डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ फैमिली प्लानिंग था उस समय, मिनिस्टर खेत सिंह राठौड़ हुआ करते। तो हम लोग गए, आप सोचिए पूरा टूर हम लोग करके आ गए। लेकिन जो चीज निकल के आई, वो जो सबसे ज्यादा बिकी, मैं बिकना आज की भाषा में बोल रहा हूं, उस समय हम बिकना शब्द नहीं जानते थे। जो सबसे ज्यादा बिकी, जो सबसे ज्यादा हिट हुई वो स्टोरी, वो थी एक ट्रक के ऊपर लिखा हुआ था पीछे स्लोगन, जो ट्रकों के पीछे आमतौर पे लिखे होते हैं, बीवी रखो टीप टाप, दो के बाद फुल स्टॉप। अब वो जो नारा हम लोगों ने उस समय अखबारों में और एजेंसी में लगाया, उस फैमिली प्लानिंग के मोटो को उस एक नारे ने बहुत अच्छे से, जो आप कह रहे हैं कि वो कितना ग्रास्प कौन कर रहा है, तो उन चीजों के साथ मैं मानता हूं कि आपने बहुत अच्छा एफर्ट किया है। और ऐसे एफर्ट अगर आगे होंगे तो जो जजिंग के लिए आने वाली स्टोरीज हैं वो और अच्छी होंगी, अच्छी हैं पर और भी अच्छी हो पाएंगी। इस सबसे मैं माफी चाहता हूं, मुझे काम है इसलिए मैं निकलना चाहता हूं। थैंक यू।
थैंक यू सो मच गोविंद जी।
थैंक यू। थैंक यू।
Yes, Meenakshi ma'am, you wanted to ask something.
Yes. एक सवाल तो नहीं है, एक चीज में क्लियर करना चाहती कि हम लोग स्टडी में कहते हैं कि पीपल शुड बी एट whoever we are writing the story about, the person or the people should be at the center. I was a little concerned about their identity and safety, because you are writing some sensitive issue, and if the person's identity is revealed, then won't there be safety questions and identity questions, and there might be trouble for the person. So what one should do in such case?
I have, you will notice that among the points that I made, one of the important points I had made about the prerequisites of a good case study,
Yes.
the point that I made was, I said that you have to always remember to be ethical and respectful. Yeah. And one of the
Yes.
important points in this, under this thing was that you have to take informed consent. Without informed
Consent.
consent,
Yes.
you cannot. So sometimes people may want to say the most terrible things about a local politician. Like I gave you that example of that when I was in my presentation, we
Right.
mentioned of a
Yes.
woman who was complaining about corruption at a
Yes.
PDS shop, which was run by the nephew of the local MLA.
Yes.
And then her family started getting threatened. So I'm saying that this is something that we should avoid. And if the person is not, consent has not
Right.
been taken, then we cannot go ahead and simply reveal somebody's identity. Any names, images, or details should only be taken after you ask, specifically tell them that आपका वहां पे चेहरा आएगा, आपको अनुमति है आपकी, तो ही ठीक है. So this is very important. Abroad, you have consent forms and all
Yeah.
that, but here we have still not come to that level. But nevertheless, verbally,
Hmm.
if people trust you and have allowed you access into their homes, into their communities, into their neighborhoods, then the least risk bit you can do is take informed consent. And without that,
Right.
you cannot go around revealing people's, particularly when it comes to survivors of sexual violence or those kind of cases, it becomes very
Right.
difficult.
Yeah.
Even when it comes to domestic violence also, it can be very difficult for women to
Hmm.
open up and speak. So you are very
Exactly.
right in raising that point and that concern. And I think it's a point that I had made in my presentation also. But you're very right in underlining it.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Yogesh. Yeah.
Samyukta wanted to ask some questions. Samyukta, you can just unmute yourself and start your video. In case you don't want to start your video, it's okay. You could just unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you. It's first of all, thank you so much for taking us through the entire presentation, and you made a lot of relevant points. And also, I was also a student of Mr. Jahangir Patel, so that's also nice to hear. Um, I wanted to ask if we are writing these case studies for, let's say, like stakeholders, like, people who are probably donors or like fundraising foundations or CSRs. Um, how would you write them differently? That is my first question. And second, uh, for case studies or like, for stories like this, would you implement or how would you include a monitoring and evaluation framework? Because that's very important when it comes to like, in this context. And a lot of these fundraising initiatives want this to be included to show results. Like you said on one of the slides, like, donor want to see the stories. But really, like, in this context, what makes an impact on them?
Well, I also made that point, Sangeeta, about the fact that, about cooking rice, right? I may use that example. I said you pick up 1 grain of rice and you check whether it is done. So it is something like that for the donor. If you actually provide them with a case study which shows that if they are they're putting the money that they are putting in, all your pie charts and graphs and everything will give them a sense that, oh, we are reaching so many. But you pick up that one little girl child who is now, she used to go to work on a brick kiln, she used to look after the younger siblings while her parents worked on the brick kiln. If she's begun to go into school and she speaks happily and her parents speak of their dreams for her when she becomes financially independent, the fact that something like this is said, it makes a very big impact, and donors like to see such success stories because they're able to put a face and name to uh, what is being said. So obviously that creates a bigger impact. So I feel, which is why it is irrespective of whether you're doing it journalistically or whether you're doing it for donors, it is very important that we do these stories. I would, however, say journalistically, one is able to do a much more critical kind of a approach. One is able to do this in a journalistic thing. While that license is available, when it comes to writing for donors, you will have to always say, they will always immediately, so and 1, 2, 3, 4 have been done, but 5, 6, 7 is not up to the mark, and 8, 9, 10 is very poor. If we have to say that, then we immediately say, but if we do this, and further provide more funding or provide better services or improve so in 1, 2, 3, 4, these things, then all these other points which are now lacking will also improve and come up to mark. So we can show like a comparative thing in both these instances, and that can make the donor actually support your cause even more. So when you highlight the negative thing, it's not only, see, with journalistic pieces, very often what happens is the emphasis that, if somebody, for example, I will tell you, somebody from the Lions Club had come to us and saying that we are distributing wheelchairs to the handicapped people on us, and we are having an event where a big event auditorium, people will be called up, and then wheelchairs and ramp, and then they go down on the this thing. So great visuals and all that. So they came to tell us, and the editor immediately said, "Well, what's so special? They're doing a good job, but what's so special?" But the point is, the same editor was wildly excited when she found out that of all the wheelchairs that were given, only like they had given more than 500 wheelchairs at that event, and only two were functional within 2 months. All the other wheelchairs had broken down. So then she said that what has happened and how did this happen? So it was done as a story. Now, if you were reporting something like that with the donor, you would say that perhaps we need to relook at the kind of quality of chairs that we are giving and stuff like that. This we need to relook at the quality of chairs to be given is something that the NGO or the voluntary organization that is distributing the chairs will talk about. But the journalist will not say this, right? So that is the difference that will be there. I forgot what was the third question. What was the third one?
Um, it was that, there's a lot of monitoring and evaluation at a lot of nonprofits. And it ties into with this, like, basically, what are the communication efforts that, I mean, yes, case studies and everything, but in terms of the storytelling, what have you achieved? So instead of saying KPIs, I'm just saying monitoring and evaluation because that's more relatable to this. But I cannot connect these two for all stories. It's basically, yeah, we are doing advocacy. But how to include that in a monitoring and evaluation framework?
No, within the monitoring and evaluation framework, exactly what I'm saying. What went right? Case studies. What went
Okay.
wrong? Case studies. What went right because 1, 2, 3, 4, the case study will show. And what went wrong or could not be as right as the others because of 1, 2, 3, 4 reasons. So that is what the case study should seek to do. And I think that is within the context of monitoring and evaluation. That's where you will be able to bring in these stories.
All right. Yeah, that helps. Thank you so much. It's sometimes very challenging for like budding nonprofits. It's challenging to convince them that why case study. They're like, oh, what's the big deal? Like we have to give numbers. It's very difficult to convince them, in my experience, to highlight like case studies because obviously, like you said, when you go to these communities and they are very candid in I mean they'll speak about everything, and then so you don't want to sugarcoat, you want to be journalistic as well, even though like it's advocacy and you're writing a case study. And so usually the board members or something, they're like, oh no, we don't want to talk about this at all, and I'm like, no, but we have to, like you said, I think it's a good way to say that this can be better.
Uh, I mean, sometimes you're right that we have to, when we say seeking consent, we spoke earlier also in response to the other earlier question. Um, you have to understand that while you take consent, it should also not, it should then you should respect what they are saying in that consent. I remember reporting on a little girl who was 15-year-old, and she had been drugged and trafficked from here to the Indo-Nepalese border from Kalyan. Okay. And she somehow managed to miraculously escape from the clutches of her traffickers and find her way back. It took her almost a week-long ordeal to come back from there. But then, when the case was being filed and all that, and I went to report on it, and when we spoke to the girl and her parents, the girl actually, she was about 16 and a half, 17 years old. And she said, I said, we will morph your face. Don't worry. You can, if you can speak whatever you want to, and we will just morph your face so your face will not be revealed. And we will not reveal your name also. And she got very angry with me. She said, you're making it out to be as if I am the sinner and I have done something wrong. You not go and speak to the man, the local politician who was involved in this trafficking racket? You will speak to him. Will you morph his face? So ask him whether he wants to morph his face. I don't want to morph my face. So I was quite stunned. I didn't know what to do. But then those were the days of, mobiles had just begun, and I had a very basic mobile. I couldn't reach my boss, Srinivasan Jain. What I did was I got her to say exactly all this on camera. And then we used that as the soundbite, because then it meant that, hey, she was herself saying that I want to in fact tell the world that this is what this man did to me, and I want him brought to book. And it became something that the court admitted and made it part of the case also. So yes, I
Interesting.
mean, we have to case, things will change. Thank you,
I agree.
Sanyukta. I'm happy to see that you're also a student of Jahangir Patel as I am at XIC.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, any other question? Anything in the chat box, Pooja?
No, sir.
All right. In which case, then we probably will uh, call it a close, because we've run out of questions. We've sort of addressed whatever was brought up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. It was great
Thank
interacting with
you. Thank you for this opportunity, and it was wonderful points one received.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And great to
Thank
meet
you so
everyone, particularly Vibhuti Ben. I hope she's there.
Yeah,
Mm.
Vivitiben, I saw she had also joined.
But she's left now.
Yeah.
No, I don't think she's there now, but I think she was
Thank you
there.
so much, Pooja. Thank you so much, Yogesh.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining, everyone. Okay, then we'll end the meeting now.
Yes.